So does the trespass ordinance just kind of then goes into the graffiti ordinance, or is that?
So I believe that was referenced.
Yeah, it references it, so you
the
can.
trespass, the violations
Oh, okay.
of this ordinance.
Yeah, as a basis of why we put it trespass.
Did we get did you send us a draft of changes to? You did. You sent us a draft of changes to.
Yes,
Like,
and it was posted. I don't know if it got sent directly or.
Right. Oh, right. That's
Joseph sent the trespass this
Okay.
morning. I don't know the.
See the word. It was drafted.
it's posted on.
CivicClerk.
Yes, I have that.
That's what. Yeah.
That's what we have.
Yeah, and I also am inviting Eric from my office, who has looked closer at the graffiti issues because of an appeal of a couple tickets that we've had that we're working with, and he's working on that case. So I'm also inviting him to pop on just in case there's questions, because he actually drafted this language.
What I have, it doesn't show like doesn't show a track changes.
Oh.
It's got underlining, so there's a new
Oh, it does?
section. Yeah, if you look
I'm actually looking at what you sent me by email rather than, let me go to what's on
on CivicClerk.
CivicClerk, which I always want to call for.
Yeah, so it looks like there's a section, and it's an enhancement, penalty enhancement section.
Oh, this is different than the email that I got.
So in a section D2.
So can you send me an email asking if
to
we
post
should
that.
post this?
And I thought that's what got posted, but let me double check. Sorry.
Okay.
Yes, that should be that looks like what's there. So there's an additional, the penalties, D2 and 3.
Oh, okay. I got it now. Sorry.
No, of course.
So do we want to just kind of go through this one? This one doesn't have, there's the track changes. So the added part is at the end.
Yes.
Notwithstanding paragraph 1 above, a violation of this ordinance is a criminal offense and shall be punishable pursuant to 19A of this code if it can be proven that the defendant violated this section maliciously.
And 19A, just for our information, is a criminal offense punishable by a fine of not less than $50 and not more than $500. It looks like there's no jail time associated with that, and you can get an order in addition to like a restraining order or an abatement order, and then if there are damages, you can get sort of like a restitution in that. Yes, actually, a restitution. Yes, so there's after a restitution hearing. So that's what the agreement means.
Okay, so what's added here, this is related to the stickering issue and kind of hate crimes issue. And so let's back up a minute and talk about we know one of our obstacles, which we have just been issued by a defendant, a complaint about how we have enforced this. So we know about that. But what other obstacle, Chief, I don't think anybody seems to be, nobody has been, my understanding is the state's attorney has given blanket authority for perpetrators of graffiti, stickering, defacement to go to the CJC. So can you explain what is happening now. I understand that nobody is being referred to the CJC for graffiti. That's what I have been told. There hasn't been a case in a long time.
Yeah, I don't know how many graffiti arrests we've made. So we track vandalism in Valcourt, not graffiti, and I included the vandalism numbers there on the top of that sheet. Vandalism is going to be almost entirely online reports now because it is one of the 15 things that we do want as an online report. It is generally a report that is made just so that it can be reported and perhaps insurance can be involved, but it's not something that we generally move to investigate or look into, absent there being other kinds of extraordinary circumstances. With regard to graffiti as a subset of vandalism, unless it's interrupted in the act, it's not something that we are currently capable of addressing. If we were to address it, yes, it would be the policy of the. Let me correct that. Every case that I know of has been referred to the CJC, including felony level vandalism, such as the one on the marketplace of the mural that was on the marketplace, which did occasion a full investigation. It was literally an international investigation when Canada tried to locate the perpetrator. That went to the CJC. These are not cases that the state's attorney prior to the pandemic indicated a desire to prosecute, and I don't believe that's changed since. That said, I would be cautious about, I don't know if, and the city attorney is a better person to answer this than I. The state level statute, which is a crime, is very clear that damage has to occur. The city ordinance talks about gum labels and stickers and allows a civil penalty to be assessed to somebody who violates that. But absent damage happening, I don't believe it can be called a crime. And so I would caution that has to be addressed and sort of assessed. I don't know what the rights of a city in creating municipal code are to call things crimes versus what the statutes have outlined as crime.
If I could just do that. A long time ago, every violation of a city ordinance, of a municipal ordinance, was a criminal offense. And the legislature changed that to allow for civil violations, but they didn't require any sort of hierarchy, so they could be kept there on that. So just to answer that question, we can make criminal violations of our ordinance because of the nature of the state code. The question of this, for me, there are two questions. I don't know if you want to read.
Sure.
One question sort of is an administrative one. Whenever I tried to bring a criminal case, a violation of a city ordinance to a then district court, it was a criminal division court, I was looked at like a maniac, right? So this is not the state attorney who this didn't have anything to do with it. It was just the judges, all the judges, like, what are you doing here? This is a city case. If you want to have a criminal case, go to the state's attorney. No, I'm sorry, Your Honor, I've got the right to bring these cases, right? So I think that the culture, we want to be sure we're going.
Can you explain that?
But I can explain that.
Why the judges?
Because they were so unused to seeing municipalities.
But they're saying you should go to the state's attorney, so why did you not?
Because it was a city case, and the state attorney had nothing to do with this case. It wasn't a state offense; it was a city violation.
So you were in the environmental court?
No, I prosecuted electricians who were working without permits, plumbers without permits, landlords who were absolute scofflaws, right? After multiple chances, right? All criminal violations. State attorney had no jurisdiction over it. It was our jurisdiction. But to get the judges to take it seriously and not try to kick it out just because of the people that were in front of them, and in essence, because it was it was messing up their caseload.
I I don't understand how jurisdiction works,
I
because you say it's ours, but we don't have a municipal court.
don't need them, no,
So
it goes,
where
it
does
goes
it-
there, it goes to the same criminal court that you would go for a misdemeanor or a felony.
And the state attorney doesn't
And the
prosecute.
state attorney does
in
not
criminal court?
doesn't prosecute city criminal violations. It's actually, don't try to make it too complicated, keep it very simple.
I understand it.
Simply put, city has the statutory right to make certain violations crimes. And the place that you go is to the same court that the state attorney prosecutes their cases.
And you're the prosecutor.
And I am the
basically. As
prosecutor.
city attorney.
As a
just
city
prosecute.
attorney.
If we make this a crime, we don't need to use the state's attorney.
That is
to
correct.
prosecute that crime.
That's correct, but we do need to make sure that the judges buy into the fact that we're there, because it will make it exceedingly difficult. It will be very vexing to be in front of a judge who doesn't think that you should be there and will look at and berate you, even if you've known them for 20 years like I did.
I feel about that.
You know what I'm saying?
I do, and I know there was communications. I remember, I think Eileen sending some to the
Yeah.
courts and stuff, trying to make sure that they understood and they were willing to move this
So I
forward.
think that a meeting that just with the administrative judges, the administrative judge and the state attorney and the police and city attorneys, to just smooth the way if we go in this direction would be advisable, right? Just because, and then you get it, that way it's really clear why we're here. There's no problem at the Judicial Bureau, because those are municipal cases. Sometimes it's a little odd when you have an attorney go. I prosecuted every single noise case for over a year when we first changed the ordinance to do that, because so that's the administrative concern. The question is whether, and this is more, maybe Eric has been doing this work, whether this enhancement meets the tests for a permissible look at speech or hate speech, so to speak.
And I think it does. Sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's what
This was based upon primarily a Washington case. I can find the name of the case if it's helpful. But as you'll know, shortly after the RAV decision, where the Supreme Court said you can't have a crime that says no racist tagging because that's content-based speech. Shortly, like the next year, we had the U.S. Supreme Court decision that said, but you can have hate enhancements for something that's already a crime. And then that same year, the Washington State Supreme Court heard a case, State versus Talley, and that's 858 P2 217, where the question was asked, okay, does that apply to graffiti offenses where the intent was to harm someone through the graffiti? And the Washington Supreme Court said, well, yes, because you're doing something that's already wrong, and you're doing it with an intent to harm somebody. And the law has always, our common law has always allowed us to punish people more severely if they're intending to harm somebody by what they're doing wrong, if it's already wrong. And in Iowa, in an Iowa decision,
Go ahead, Eric. Go ahead, Eric.
in an Iowa decision very recently, the Iowa Supreme Court reached a very similar conclusion. And there was also the cross-burning case, and I'm forgetting the name of it, before the U.S. Supreme Court, where the U.S. Supreme Court upheld a Virginia state. Well, it didn't fully uphold it, but it found that there was no First Amendment violation for a Virginia statute that said that cross-burning with the intent to intimidate, could be illegal, even though that might be an expressive act, and it was specifically targeting an expressive act. Because again, the intent wasn't like an RAV to criminalize, racist speech was the ordinance in RAV. The intent was to tell somebody that when you do something you shouldn't be doing anyways with the intent to harm, that can be punished, and it can be punished more severely.
Are there any cases where you move from a civil offense to a criminal offense as the enhancement? The criminal charge is an enhancement of a civil offense?
Yeah, so let me speak to that. All of the cases I looked at, started out criminal and then were sort of worse crimes if you had the enhancement. I didn't see a case, and we can spend more time looking. The reason I proposed it this way, this was, again, largely based upon the Washington statute in structure, at least. The reason I proposed it this way is because I said, well, what do we already have? If I go to section 1.9, what are sort of the base punishments for violations of this code? And the base punishments were, if something's less severe, it's civil, and if it's more severe, it's basically the same fine, but it's criminal. And so I was just trying to, since we treated graffiti as a civil offense, and sort of the base enhancement that's sort of built into our code for any kind of violation is then to bump it up to criminal, I was just trying to follow through the process we already have in place. But we can look at that more deeply. I think that's an interesting question that I guess I didn't ponder as much as I could have.
I think that it's only a question of the nexus with the First Amendment issue there.
Yeah.
As to whether you're really criminalizing speech as opposed to it being an enhancement. So, I don't have a problem with this generally. That's my concern. And if it was all criminal, which I don't believe it should be, then I think that this scheme fits correctly. But it's sort of that jump.
Right. No, I can appreciate that.
Okay. So I guess from the chief, other than a shortage of staff, what we get a lot of is photos of people committing these crimes, and there is no follow. They in some cases they are identifiable in the photos or the videos, and we're not getting any enforcement of graffiti based on, even if you're not there at the moment, based on these kind of reports. Is that problem a staff shortage, or is that problem a statutory problem?
It's a staff problem, and I don't know that we at the police department have received those kinds of things where there are photographs and video showing exactly who it is or undiscernible. In the case of the stickering, there were statements made that everyone knew who it was, but it took months for someone to deliver to us something that was in fact actionable in a way that made an officer say, yes, I can tell who that is, and I will go issue that individual a ticket. So I think there's some information that's being lost in translation or being somewhat exaggerated by some folks as far as, this is super clear, I know exactly who this is. When asked to attest to that in a way that puts that individual on the hook legally, sometimes that certainty disappears. That said, if we have video of a person doing a graffiti act on somebody's fence, and that person made the report online, as is the case, and we looked at it, no, we're not adequately staffed to investigate that and try to determine who it is. If the person says, this is definitively my neighbor who did this, in that case, we probably would follow up on it and issue either a ticket or a citation to the individual for it if it was clear. If it truly were clear and not, I know who this is because I know who this is. There's a big difference.
Well, historically, I think we caught a lot of people based on their own admission, which actually the stickering, I think, was partly that too. The
individual in the stickering certainly made comments online that were indicative of having done things, but never fully caught to it until the I believe there's stuff in play, and I don't know that
Can
we
I
can
just
talk
be
about that.
cautious because that is under appeal, so we're not getting the specifics.
Yeah, no, I don't wanna get into specifics on that. I just wondered if there has been a change, because we used to see, and I don't honestly know where to look, but after, doing the graffiti, a lot of people who did it wanted to then brag about it online. And that's how we caught a lot of people when we were catching people for this. We just aren't anymore. And I wondered if you have, if I find something online that has somebody admitting to the graffiti in the underpass here, is that something actionable, or has there been a change in how we interpret the ordinance and the thresholds required to act?
There hasn't been a change in how we interpret the ordinance. There's a change in how we can respond based on resources available. If a complaint were filed online that stated, here's photography of the graffiti in the underpass, here is an online screenshot of a person bragging about having done it, that and the person's named and identified, not just an anonymous Reddit poster, that could occasion an effort to sort of go the extra step to see, can we actually tie this person to it? But that alone wouldn't be sufficient to, I don't even know that kind of admission, like, I did it, and doesn't this look great? I did it, would be enough necessarily to issue a citation. It might be sufficient to issue a ticket, but I don't know that.
Did you ever enforce this? Because my recollection is that was exactly how a lot of people were.
No, these were all civil tickets, and I was never asked to go to the Judicial Bureau to enforce that like a ticket. So, and I don't know how many, if any, that we did.
I'm wondering, are there other cities that are great at like cracking down on graffiti that we look at, and you have awareness of? Are other cities doing a better job at this with short staff, or
Not short staff that I know. I mean, New York did a really good job on it in the early '90s in two ways. They in the transit system, they made it a policy to immediately repaint cars, and so the people making the work could never really enjoy their work because everything was repainted immediately at night in the pens. And so it started to frustrate. But they also did start making a lot of arrests, and officers were told this matters. We want these kinds of arrests. We want fair evasion arrests. We want all these low-level things that officers had been told, that's not important to us. We don't want you doing that. Even low-level narcotics arrests have been, the police department had been told that that's a path towards corruption. Anytime officers are in the vicinity of drugs and or the money associated with drugs, it's a path to corruption. We don't want corruption. That's more important to us than crime fighting. And so don't do these things. That changed in the early 90s, first in the transit police department, then in the police department. No, we do want this. We want you. It was what later became called broken windows policing or quality of life policing, where the little stuff matters. And if you get to the little stuff before it turns to big stuff, you actually forestall the big stuff. A lot of departments have had, have been able to do that, but none with fewer resources.
So have you been told not to go after graffiti violators?
No,
You don't have the
nobody has been told by that at all. It's just if an officer is on shift and gets a report about a graffiti call versus taking calls for a person who's actively endangering people on Church Street, or for drugs at the library, or for trespasses at Decker where people feel threatened and unsafe, they're going to go for those latter all the time. The graffiti's just not
It just
what they're
seems
going
like
to go
there's
do.
so much graffiti that
There is.
it's hard to believe there's never been. It just seems like eventually you're going to get a time
You
where
trip over one.
well, yeah, an officer is not busy and graffiti is happening. It just seems like the overlap.
Although
there
I
is
keep
gotta be
wondering
big.
why I personally am not tripping over these people.
Have you
I mean,
seen it?
That's what I mean. Like, as I walk around town a lot,
A
and I
neighbor-
walk late at night, like, how am I not
My neighbor
personally
saw somebody
You're out
and
late,
interrupted them.
out late, Gene?
A neighbor who intercepted a graffiti artist which after this I sent maybe not a good idea for you to go running after somebody on the street. But he intercepted somebody and yelled at them and told them off for painting a city property sign. And he said to him, well, I know Sarah George isn't going to do anything about this. That's what the graffiti artist said to my neighbor.
Right, and I know of a case where the cops did come, but then did not act, which we've talked about, but we'll.
It'd be miserable to have to go to a bunch of meetings at the Community Justice Center.
Okay, so back to this,
debate.
you don't have any issues with the current ordinance, and I think the only,
The current ordinance or the current draft that you've got?
the draft that we have only changes the hate crimes aspect of it. So for general enforcement, you don't have an issue with the current ordinance.
The current ordinance, I have no issues with the current ordinance. I do think that making it a criminal ordinance is delicate, but I defer to Councilor Bergman and certainly to the city attorney's office on whether or not that's something that a city can do or whether it's appropriate. But I think there is a clear difference between the VSA statute and what it requires with regard to intent and damage versus what we require for our civil statute. Certainly have no objection to the city having a civil statute as is currently outlined in 2129. I think that it makes a lot of sense. I'm glad that it's broader than the VSA is. The Vermont statutes are, and I think that's important. I do think that this is. I think that if the city attorney's office believes that that's going to pass muster, then so be it. I think that we are on somewhat delicate ground when it comes to talking about whether we're dealing with the content of an act or whether it's the act. That's one of the reasons why the graffiti statute deals with damage. It doesn't deal with whether or not the person is what the person's saying or not. It deals with whether or not you have caused damage to another person's property or public property. Our statute largely, our ordinance largely does the same. It's just broader in what it allows. It doesn't mean it's defacement, not just damage. And defacement becomes a matter of just even putting your mark on something like a sticker.
Well,
And I believe that Eric started to say.
Is this limited to doing these things on? I mean, this seems to be really focusing on pretty targeted harassment. And is it limited to this kind of thing on somebody's private property? It says painted, drawn, depicted, or posted symbols or words on the property of the victim, when the symbols or words historically or traditionally connote hatred or threats.
I sort of assumed that in that case the victim could be the community and the property of the community, in the sense that, for example, if you were putting it on signage that belongs to all of us.
Well, that's not on the property of the victim.
No, but it says including.
If I could clarify one point, yeah. So the intent, what this is going after here, is not the content, because it's a fine line, but the case law is clear that you can't provide an enhancement because you don't like the content. But if you can show, if there's evidence that the person who was engaged in the act was trying to cause harm on one of these bases, so they were trying to intimidate or harass somebody on any of these bases, including by drawing these images on their own property, then the case law is pretty clear that we can provide an enhancement because of that harmful intent to intimidate or harass somebody. That's the wrong that can be punished, not the content, but the goal of hurting someone. So I do want to be clear about that point. It's a fine point, but it's an important one.
Eric, could you also clarify, is this limited to acts on somebody on the victim's property, or does it include acts on public property?
It's including without limitation. So notwithstanding one, about anything that would be illegal under one would receive an enhancement if you can show that there was this malicious intent, including under circumstances where the words and images were, let's see, what is the actual language? It's been a while since I wrote this. In circumstances where the defendant has painted, drawn, depicted, or posted symbols or words on the property of the victim. So that's there, number one, because I was tracking the language from the statute that was upheld. But also, if you're doing the graffiti on somebody's property, that would be further evidence of that intent to cause the malicious harm. So that's what that language is there. But the chief is right. The word including means to include, not to say that it's not an enhancement if it's on public property. Does that make sense?
Well, it just seems odd to include this one very specific thing if the intent is for it to be broadly inclusive. Why put that in there? If it's broadly inclusive, why do you need to?
It's an example.
Yeah, but it's a very narrow example, and if the intention is to be broad, why don't you have a broad example?
Well, it actually is narrow in terms of the property to focus on, but is actually broad in terms of the actions.
Well, I agree with that.
And so there you sort of get the mix with both. I mean, I think that it wouldn't hurt except to make it longer to have other examples if there are any.
Well, I think you could say including without limitation, blah 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 blah, on either public or private property, rather than this focus on the victim's property, which makes you think that it has to be. That makes me think that all of these acts have to be very directly personalized.
That's one person.
So certainly we can craft this, within the limits of the law, however the committee wants. So I'm not trying to necessarily defend the language that's here, but to explain the language that's here. The without limitation, including without limitation, is standard legal language to let the reader know, to let the court know in particular, that it doesn't have to be this, as Councillor Bergman said, this is just an example. And the rationale for including the example is, if these are the circumstances, that would be pretty good evidence that somebody has violated the broader rule. And so it's meant to provide an example that would, again, tend to show evidence that we violated the broader rule. But if the committee doesn't like that, it doesn't have to be this way. To me, it's clear that it doesn't have to be on private property from this language, that it's just meant as an example to clarify the rule. But if there's a concern that a layperson reading this will get confused, I can respond to that direction.
Well, far be it for me to argue with three attorneys who all seem to be in agreement on this, but as a layperson, I would say it does mean something different to me than it means to you. So for clarification, I would find it helpful to be more inclusive without limitation.
I think that's fine, whenever you can get clarity. In my mind, the bigger issue with this actually is more administrative. The person who will bring this case will be the police officer, a sworn officer, whereas a person who is going to issue a civil ticket can be any one of the folks who are authorized to issue civil tickets. So that is not really a drafting issue, because I don't think you can, for this type of thing, you can or should be having non-police officers issue criminal citations for this. It's very different than plumbing inspector issuing a criminal citation to a plumber who's not operating with a license. This is much more standard in that. And yeah, at the very least, if there is a desire to have other people be the issuers of criminal citation, we should put that in to this statute specifically. Because of the default, if you look at 1-9, it is pretty, it's implicit in that. So that would be either drafting wise or administratively something. Once we
I have a question about how we enforce. So right now, only the police can enforce graffiti. Is that correct?
No, a CSO or my guess is that an urban park ranger could do it within the parks. I think any
What
city.
about DPI?
I think, and yes, I think that anybody who is authorized
To use 2129, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and anybody who is, authorized under 1-9, so if you gotta go back to the civil offenses, the general one, and we basically say that, there are these people that can be authorized to issue any law enforcement.
Well, maybe that is something that, if we want to have graffiti enforcement, and we do not have the police officers, I don't think honestly the police officers want to enforce this, and they have a lot of other things to enforce, whether or not they want to enforce it.
I think I see it happening in front of them. So I think it bothers cops just as much as anybody else. I know that we've got that story, but for the most part, I certainly don't.
But I wonder if we could get DPI to do enforcement, if we can shift that. If they see it happening, sure, but you're also telling me that they're not going to these calls, and that's understandable. I'm not faulting anybody for that. But could we get more enforcement from DPI? So I think with this, attorneys have heard the feedback and concerns, and I would ask. I know that Bill Ward couldn't be here because I think he's on vacation.
Yes.
But if you could just send him this and tell him that the committee would like his feedback, let him know when the next meeting is. I don't know that we need him to present or anything, but if he has something he wants to share with us, he should come to the next meeting.
Okay.
And I'm not, so we asked for some kind of, I think, kind of minor changes to this.
Yeah. I mean, I think, to be clear, the issuing officers, I think you should just make that crystal clear who you want to be able to issue.
Yeah, in order to keep that in line with the state requirements on what hate crime enhancements are, you need to add military membership.
Chief, you didn't get a chance to look at this before, so.
Yeah, I've never seen it. I haven't seen it
So
before.
we'll
But
make sure you get a copy of it, and certainly, so you have more to talk about.
Okay.
that's included in the protected classes.
I think that we're good with this.
Yeah.
So the other thing that